Welcome to Mind Yourself, a podcast sharing real-life stories from real people, alongside conversations about mental health and emotional well-being. Listener discretion is advised, as this episode may include themes some listeners may find distressing. Wherever you're joining us from, whether you're walking, driving, or taking a quiet moment for yourself, you're very welcome here. Let's get started.
We welcome Siobhán O'Neill-White to the Mind Yourself podcast. Siobhán, you're very welcome.
Thank you.
You are probably best known as being the founder of mams.ie.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us a little bit about mams.ie and what inspired you to create it?
Yeah, I come from quite a professional background. I worked in Motherhood and Oracle, big American companies like that. And then I had my first child, and they rejigged my job while I was on maternity leave and didn't tell me. So when I left, I was managing a team of 7, responsible for Europe, Middle East and Africa market. And when I went back, they were like, so your job is gone, but hey, we're going to give you a different job. We're going to give you the same pay, but it's 4 grades lower. You can't do a 4-day week, which I had agreed, being a parent. And but because they were offering me the same salary, there wasn't a whole lot I could do. I know the laws have moved on, but at the time I went to see a solicitor, I was very upset, and he said, look, you could go to court, but you could win, you could lose, you just don't know. So they offered me redundancy and I took it, but it was really upsetting because I had a baby, not a lobotomy, and I didn't lose my brain. I mean, yes, everything has changed, but I just felt so aggrieved. And I still wanted to work. I didn't want to just, everyone can do what they want to do. Me personally, I still wanted to work. And I just fell into writing, and then that developed into, it was originally called Mumstown, and then we changed it to mams.ie in 2016. And here we are.
Siobhán, something that you're very passionate about and you've spoken about on different platforms and radio is that women are really being let down by the healthcare system. Can you tell us a little bit about that and tell us why you think it is that is happening?
Yeah, I think we're let down from the start, really. I have teenage daughters, and I know myself as a teenager going to the doctor with heavy periods and things like that. And it's you're so dismissed. You're told. I remember being in college, and my best friend, we'd be in college together. We were up in Dundalk, and we'd be walking along, and I would have to stop and put my hand on the wall and bend over, and she would go, give her a bit of room, period pain. And we actually thought that this was normal. We didn't think this was something abnormal, and it was abnormal. But there was no, this is not right. So I had to fight. I ended up going to loads and loads of doctors, ended up going private, and it turned out I did have some ovarian cysts and I had endometriosis, but it took such a long time to discover that. And for me, luckily, with the endometriosis, I had laser surgery, and after a couple of weeks, it made a huge difference for me, and it really did help. And I had the cysts removed, and that really did help. But I was left with 1 ovary, and they said, look, it's going to be really hard for you to have children. I was about to get married, and I said to my then fiance, I said, look, I know you really want kids. I wasn't particularly mad about whether I did or didn't. I didn't know at the time but I said to him, I understand if you don't want to marry me. And he was like, whatever happens. He was grand. But to be put in a position at, 25 years of age and be told, now you probably won't be able to have kids. It's going to be really hard. You've left with 1 ovary. And I remember going back to that doctor and saying I was still having some pain. And he told me a stiff whiskey would be the, have that before you get amorous. And that was the advice from a private doctor in a private clinic that was expensive to go and see. I suppose that just, again, even then at that time, I didn't think I was being particularly let down. I accepted that that's just the way that things were. But now, with more information and a bit of experience, I realize that is an absolutely terrible way to treat any young girl, any young woman. And the lack of information that I certainly had growing up, and as I got into my 20s and 30s and 40s, I'm still trying to learn things, and I still find it hard to access information. And I think that is, I don't know any situation where a man would go to a doctor and say, I have such a terrible, terrible pain. And the doctor would say, get up there now, we'll do X, Y, Z to you. And by the way, we won't give you any pain reliever sedation. And it wouldn't happen. I just don't think men would ever accept that. And I think women we've been trained to just tolerate pain our whole lives from when we get our first period. So I think we have to challenge that. And, I'm not talking about going out and burning my bra or any of that. I'm just talking about having the right information and access to the right healthcare that we need when we need it. And I really don't think we should ever have to fight for that. I think it's insane that we do have to fight for that.
Is there much support in Ireland for women who have an endometriosis diagnosis?
It's so hard to get a diagnosis. Like 1 in 10 in Ireland, they reckon. And that's if they're estimating 1 in 10, it's probably 1 in 8, My sister's trying to, she doesn't know if she has it or doesn't have it. She's going through some stuff at the moment. Another one of my sisters had ovarian cysts as well. And it got to the point where her cyst burst in her kitchen. And she had to be rushed to hospital by ambulance and have emergency surgery. Where did we get to the point where we allow a woman to be in that much pain? And an ovarian cyst is a painful thing to have. Everybody, they can be different sizes. Mine was the size of a grapefruit. It was horrendous. So I've had that surgery in my cyst, but my sister's actually burst. This is where somebody can develop sepsis. There's no excuse or reason for that to happen. I really don't. I don't understand it. I really don't. I just don't understand it. And also, if that had been handled properly, it wouldn't have needed an ambulance. It wouldn't have needed emergency surgery. It would have been done as a day case, and she would have been in and out with a keyhole surgery, home, that evening, maybe the next day. And it would have been a lot less expense on the healthcare system, a lot less trauma for everybody involved. And I just don't understand why we're still allowing situations to get so bad that it has to be, become an emergency situation.
Something else that you speak very publicly about is your own experience of pregnancy loss and miscarriage. You've had 2 miscarriages.
Yeah.
What were those experiences like for you? And I suppose, what was it that prompted you to speak so publicly about that experience?
The shock of it, really. I had my son and everything. It was a bit rocky. The birth wasn't great now, but he was a lovely little baby. He was a very happy little baby. And we found out I was pregnant. I think he was 7 months old. So it was a bit of a surprise. We were like, what? We were on a holiday and I could smell this like fish market. My husband was like, what are you? I said, I'm telling you. And it was about a half a mile away. And he went, oh my God, you're pregnant. And I was pregnant. So we went in, I had, remember it really clearly. It was a Sunday afternoon. We were going to go to cinema, and my in-laws were going to mind the baby. And I hadn't had a lot of morning sickness, and I assumed, I'm getting lucky this time, where the first pregnancy I did. And I went to the bathroom and I saw one tiny spot of blood, and I just had this feeling of dread. So I rang the hospital, spoke to a midwife, explained, and she said, look, it's probably nothing. What were you going to do today? I said, we were going to go to the cinema. Go to the cinema. You'll be grand. If anything drastic happens, come in. So I said, oh, okay. Went to the cinema. Went to see Cheaper by the Dozen. I still can't look at it to this day. And I love Steve Martin. And then we came home that night and it was okay. And then the next morning I woke up and the spot was a little bit bigger. So I went to the GP. And he was like, yeah, it's probably nothing. I said, okay. And women do have spotting. So I was really trying to convince myself it's spotting. But then it became more, and we went into the hospital, and I didn't have a good birth with my son. It was quite traumatic. So we went to a different hospital in Dublin, and we went into this hospital and we sat there for hours and went in and we had a scan. And when we had the scan, we saw the heartbeat. And I'm still grateful now. Anyway, we saw the heartbeat, and then the doctor came in and he said, no, it's probably a miscarriage and it just hasn't happened yet. And he walked out of the room, and I just, first of all, emotionally, what? But physically, I didn't know what was going to happen. And they said, go home, come back if it gets really bad. And I thought, well, what's really bad, I did not know. So my mom had a miscarriage, and she had talked about it. In fairness, she was always quite open, and I rang her and I said, Mom, please, can you come over? And she came over. She was great. We were at home. Mitchell's running around, my son, and I'm still bleeding, but it's not a lot. And then all I can describe is like my waters broke, and it was just blood. And I actually thought, I'm going to die. There's something so wrong, I'm going to die. And my mom was there, and I was like, oh my God, Mom. And the pain was horrendous. It was like labor pain. I thought, oh my God, something's really, really wrong. So my mom, it was great. And I remember my mom said, Dave, get her in the car, put her sitting on a towel, get her straight in. So we had been so upset with the doctor sending us home with not even a leaflet, nothing to say what could physically happen. I didn't know what was normal. So anyway, we got into the car, and I remember saying to my husband, I'm glad my mum is there. She's the only person who could clean up that blood. I couldn't let anyone else do that. Well, obviously my husband would, but I was glad it was my mum. And we got to the hospital, and as we got out of the car, there was 4 girls in high heels and dresses, and they were holding hands, and they were giggling, and they were all like in their 20s, and they were just, rocking up the road. And I looked at them, and I got out of the car, and there was a trail of blood behind me. And my husband brought me inside, and we went in, and they brought me into the emergency room. And they put me into the emergency room with 4 women, 4 or 5, who were all in labour. And all of those women were hooked up to monitors, so I could hear all their babies' heartbeats. And I remember when I had my son, it's such a momentous thing in your life, and you're so excited. And I did not want those women to know I was losing my baby, because I didn't want to upset them. So I had my hand over my mouth while I was crying. And there was a lot of blood, and there was a lot of pain. And the nurse wasn't particularly sympathetic. And I struggled with that too. So anyway, it was 4 hours later, a lot of blood, a lot of pain. And there was a really, really bad pain. And a doctor came in, and I said, the pain was really bad. And he examined me, and he went, we have a blockage. And he unblocked, which was shocking in itself. And then I said, what does that mean? I said, like, where's my baby? And he said, well, it's probably gone by now. So I'm still in pain. I'm still bleeding. I'm thinking, okay. And then I can hear the nurse on the phone saying, yes, I have a lady here, complete miscarriage. Yes, we're going to admit her for the night. And I thought, is she talking about me? So I said, sorry, is that me? Like, does that mean it's over? And she went, probably, yeah, you're probably done now. We'll admit you, and we'll do a D&C tomorrow and see if there's anything left. It's all very clinical, the way she spoke to me. So she put me into a wheelchair to bring me upstairs. And I said to her, look, they wouldn't let my husband into the room because it was just for people in an emergency situation. And I did ask them several times. And I said to the nurse, please, can you just go out and check on him for me? Because I know he's freaking out outside, and I'm, So she went, oh, what does he look like? I said, he's wearing a baseball cap, because we left the house in a hurry. And she went out, and she came back in. She went, grey baseball cap? I said, yeah. Well, he's sitting out there with his head in his hands. And I said, well, did you tell him anything? And she said, she didn't answer me, and she went off. She put me in a wheelchair, and then she wheeled me to the door and opened the door. My husband ran over, and he said, how is the baby? And I just thought they couldn't even have told him. They gave him no information. I was in there for 4 or 5 hours, and I said, the baby's gone. And I had to tell him that. And it was so awful having to tell him that, because why did I have to tell him that? They brought me upstairs. They admitted me. They said, that's probably it now. And then a few minutes later, whoosh, another big whoosh. And they did a D&C the next morning, and they let me go home. I suppose what prompted me to first start talking about it was the physicality of what I went through was so shocking, because I did not know physically it could be such a traumatic experience. Like, I did not know. And I feel like, why didn't even somebody hand me a leaflet or say, look, this may happen, this might happen? I felt absolutely stunned, to be honest. And I was very upset with the way the whole thing was handled with the hospital. And I said to them, you know, is there any support? And they handed me a leaflet for the Miscarriage Association of Ireland, who are fantastic, I have to say. And then they said, we have a counsellor here. And I thought, well, I'd had counselling before. I think it's a great thing to do. And I said, okay, yeah. So they said, look, in a few weeks' time, you can come in for some counselling. So in I went for the counselling, and then the woman who I was seeing told me she wasn't actually a counsellor, but she was happy to listen to me. And then she started to tell me all about her nieces and nephews. And I just sat in the room and I thought, what is happening? Like, what kind of healthcare is this? And I left, and I was really angry, like so angry. And the only good piece of advice that woman actually gave me, the woman that wasn't a counsellor working in a hospital in a different department that they shoved in as a counsellor, that's not acceptable. She told me to keep a diary, and I did, and that was a great piece of advice. Actually, I wrote into it every night, and she said, put in everything that you want to say, but end it with 2 positive things. So most of the positive things were, I had a gorgeous little baby he was so sweet. He just kept coming over and hugging me, because babies just know if there's something wrong, you know. He was so sweet. And I was so angry with my husband, and I was just angry about the whole thing. And about 6 or 7 weeks later, my husband said, can I read that diary? And I went, no. And he went, well, like, you know, would it be helpful if I read it? And I said, you're not coming across well in this diary. And he said, I'd like to read it. And I let him read it. And then he said that needs to be published. And it was. It got turned into a book in 2007. And my condition with the Liffey Press, who published, was that we would write every chapter together, because I feel men are so let down as well. They left him sitting outside and didn't give him one update in 5 hours. And he was clearly panicking. The amount of blood that came out of me, he was genuinely scared. And so we wrote the book. And so yeah, I've had some pretty gnarly experiences in hospitals, and that has definitely defined part of my writing and what I do now.
Siobhán, thank you very much for sharing that with us. I think you're right. It is really important that people speak about this stuff, and also that they can hear that they're not alone, that other people, you know, are going through challenges. And you've given us 2 really great examples of you really being let down by the healthcare system, both with the miscarriage and with the endometriosis. What advice would you give to women who feel that they are being dismissed in terms of their healthcare, their health?
Yeah, I would say go and find a different doctor. Go to like a well woman clinic. Go somewhere where there will be women that actually are educated and want to help you. Like there are great organizations there, you know, that actually have good information and that will help you. I personally prefer, if I can, to go to female doctors. I think there's just more empathy. They have a better understanding. That's just the way that it is with our anatomies. And just reach out. I guarantee you, whatever you are going through, somebody has gone through it, is going through it, is going to go through it. There's an awful feeling, even with the miscarriage. I remember a friend of mine, I crossed the street to avoid me. I'll never forget it. And I remember thinking, what is happening here? People feel so uncomfortable about certain topics. And I think that's why it's really important to speak out. So I think if you are going through something and you're not getting the support that you need from your GP or wherever it is, get it elsewhere, because there is support available. And, you know, speak to, as I said, the well woman clinics and places like that. But just keep going until you find somebody that will actually listen to you and give you the right advice. It might take a while, it might take some time, but you will get there, hopefully, eventually.
Siobhán, you also then went on to be challenged by another quite traumatic event, which was your hysteroscopy.
I know, I sound like an absolute it's like a trail of destruction here.
Can you explain what a hysteroscopy is, first of all, and then tell us maybe what your own experience was and what went so wrong?
Hysteroscopy is a word I did not know until about 3 years ago. I had never heard of it. We all know hysterectomy, and it's a bit sad that the word hysteria is linked to the womb in the first place. But anyway, hysteroscopy is when they examine inside of the cervix, and they go and they take biopsies from in and around that area, and they go in quite deep. So basically it starts off like a smear test, and then they fill your uterus and your cervix with cold water, and then they insert cameras, and then they take biopsies, all while you're fully awake with no pain relief and no sedation. When they explained it to me, I was having very, very heavy periods in my, you know, when you get into your 40s, things can change. And nobody had mentioned the word perimenopause to me at this point. But because of the heavy periods, I had a period that lasted 7 weeks. My GP said, look, I think you should go and have, I think she called it a camera test. I don't think she called it a hysteroscopy. So I was booked in for this test. And the secretary, I said to her, I started to do a bit of research. You know, I'm not going to be stupid forever. I'm going to research these things before I have them. And I started kind of hearing a few pretty scary stories about women's pain during this procedure. So I contacted the secretary and I said, look, I'm a bit concerned about this procedure. Is there an opportunity to have some sedation or some pain relief? Well, she said, you can take 2 paracetamol an hour before you come in. First of all, can I say paracetamol is not an anti-inflammatory, so they should even be saying ibuprofen, which wouldn't even scratch the surface. You can take 2 paracetamol an hour before you come in. Or if you're quite squeamish, maybe get your GP to prescribe you something like Ponston. And then come in and, and I said to her, I'm nervous, I'm quite nervous. And I was genuinely nervous. And she said, if you really want to have it under sedation, it will take 12 months. So you can have it done next week, or you can wait 12 months. And I thought, oh God, I've had this period for 7 weeks and another one for 6 weeks. And right, big girl pants on, I can do it. So I said to my husband, I'll get the train in and then you pick me up. So I went and got myself a coffee and a bun, and I was like, right, Siobhán, you can do this. In I went, and they brought me in. And so what happens is you into a gown, up on the bed, and you have actually had a female doctor and had a nurse. And the female doctor says, right, we're going to start. And I said, look, I'm just going to tell you, I'm quite nervous. So I'm going to try and relax, but I am nervous. What are you nervous about? And I said, well, I've spoken to other women and they've said this can be quite painful. Just get up. Let's just get it done. Why didn't you ask for general anaesthetic then? I said, because the secretary told me it would take a year. That's nonsense. It wouldn't take a year. It would take 3 months. And I said, no, she said a year. I don't know where you got that information. That's wrong. I said, it's really not, because I'm quite nervous. Anyway, up I got on the bed. So it starts off, open cervix. Nobody enjoys that. That's no fun. But you can handle that. We've all had smear tests done. And then they flood you with cold water, and that's a shock. I don't know why the water has to be cold, because it's like, it's very, very cold. And it's a lot of water. And then they go in and they have a camera and they're going around, and then they start to take biopsies. I've had 2 Ponston. I'm crying. I'm sitting on the bed crying. The nurse is holding my hand. She's so lovely. You're doing great. You're nearly there. You're doing so well. And the doctor's going, can you stop clenching? Because you're making this hard for me. And I was like, okay, doing my hypno breathing. I've had 2 hypnobirths. I can do it. I'm on that beach in Cuba. I'm doing all my breathing techniques, all of that. I'm physically forcing myself to relax to allow her to take these samples. It's done. I can't even stand up. My legs are so wobbly. And the nurse literally helps me off the chair, and then they walk you across an area where there's all these cubicles. And obviously you don't have any pants on, and they hand you, in hospital they give you a pad that has no sticking on the back of it, as we all know. The nurse handed me this big huge pad like a surfboard and said, just put that between. The blood running down my legs, and she walked me to the cubicle, helped me get dressed. I was in an awful state. Walked me to the front door, and my husband was there in the car. Got into the car, tears, blood, crying. I was in shock. I couldn't believe that this had happened. Got home, and they had told me to just over-the-counter painkillers for the next couple of days. So about 2 days later, I said to my husband, I don't feel well. Something's not right. And he ran me a bath, and then I got out of the bath. I couldn't really stand up. I had a fever. And he said, Siobhán, there's green stuff. You have something's really not right. Straight into A&E. They were like, they had to examine me. The pain of that was horrendous. And they said, you've got a severe infection. They had to admit me for 4 days for IV antibiotics. What happened? And I said, well, I had a hysteroscopy 3 days ago. Did you have it? I said, no, I had it in a hospital in Dublin. And you were under general anaesthetic. I said, no, I was awake. You were what? I said, no, I was awake. And they said, why were you awake? And I said, because they told me that was... No, we would never do that in this hospital. They were given out to me for letting the other... And they said, look, we have to admit you. So I had to stay in hospital for 4 days. Then I wrote a letter of complaint because I felt I'd been totally gaslit the whole way through by the hospital. And the secretary denied having said the thing about 12 months. And but then they said she is pregnant, so she might have got confused. I thought, oh my God. And they said, and because I clenched so much, my hysteroscopy was unsuccessful and I would need a repeat. So in the Lourdes, they were so lovely. Obviously, that's not where I went the first time. They booked me into the hospital in Dundalk as a day patient, and they said, we will put you asleep. And they said, while you're there, we're going to put the coil in. And I thought, thank you. So that was the end of the heavy periods, and they did a successful hysteroscopy, and I woke up to tea and toast, and I was absolutely fine. So again, no need, because of that badly handled situation, I ended up in an emergency situation with a really bad infection that you could, like, I was burning up. I was so unwell. And again, if they had have done, I feel if they had have done the hysteroscopy the way they did it in Dundalk, all of that would have been avoided. So I had 3 hospital admissions when I should have just had 1. And hysteroscopy now, there's a campaign to actually prevent hospitals to be allowed to perform a hysteroscopy without sedation. And that's spreading like wildfire at the moment. We've shared that on our page. And I think, again, you know, I just don't know. Like when my husband had a vasectomy, he was given sedation. He was given diazepam to take in the days after, to be minded. And I don't resent any of that for a second. But it was a 20-minute procedure in and out, you know. Now, driving home, he was like, don't go over the speed bumps. But I just can't think of a situation where a man would have to have a very invasive procedure and be expected to be completely awake and not to clench and to just be a good girl. Now, unclench there, you're making my job difficult. It's not acceptable.
Why do you think there is this big difference between male healthcare and female healthcare?
Because
where does that come from?
Well, it's historical, really. I mean, most cadavers until recently were male. All drugs were tested on men. My daughter is she just turned 19, and we had to take her to the hospital last year. She was having some problems with her stomach, and the doctor wanted to prescribe her this, gave her this new-ish antibiotic. And she said, it's only been around a few years, proven very good. And I said, now, would that have an impact on contraception, like the pill and things like that? We don't know because it's only been tested on men. I said, it's 2025. Are you actually serious? So that is still happening. So, I mean, why? I suppose because men were doctors, women weren't up until recent, you know, in the last, it's been recent times where women, I mean, there's a lot more male doctors actually starting to question things. And they say, you know, why would you allow a woman to go on the pill and encourage her to go on the pill? Encourage IVF if someone's trying to get pregnant. But then when she hits perimenopause, oh, no. Hormones, no. HRT, no, it'll give you breast cancer. Where that study was debunked many, many times. But women, like my mother was denied HRT because she was told it would give her breast cancer. And I'm in perimenopause now, and I say to her, how did you do this? And she said, I don't know. She said, I don't know. I thought, like, how did you get through it? So, yeah, I think it will change. I hope it will change as more women go into medicine and but research needs to change too. And I think that needs to come, there needs to be a push publicly. Like the letter of complaint I wrote for the miscarriage, I got no reply. The letter of complaint for the hysteroscopy, they totally changed. No, she didn't say this and she didn't say that. And when they couldn't blame me, then they were blaming the pregnant secretary and stuff. Nonsense. They have to take accountability. And one of the most productive things that happened with the miscarriage book that we wrote was that I worked still with the Miscarriage Association. They're amazing. And they actually invited me to go and speak with doctors and nurses in training at UCD to tell them how not to deliver the news of a miscarriage to a couple. Because when that doctor said to us, it's probably a miscarriage, it just hasn't happened yet, and walked out of the room with no information, that was devastating, but also it was bad. It was just, not to give the information and not to even look someone in the eye and have an ounce of empathy. And when I started to speak with those doctors and nurses, they were so disinterested, because who is this woman? Not a doctor. Why would we listen to her? She'd know it. But after a few minutes, then you'd see a couple of them kind of going, oh yeah. And what I would always say is, if you can't look somebody in the eye who's gone through a miscarriage, if you have to deliver that news and you can't say, I'm sorry, you need to go on a holiday or you need to change your career, because that's somebody's whole world could be crumbling. And if you can't give them 1 ounce of empathy, you're not in the right job. Really, I really believe that.
Siobhán, it's really admirable what you're doing, I suppose.
I sound like
awareness.
like a mad woman.
Not at all. I think it's fantastic that you've chosen to, number one, raise awareness of these issues, but also to advocate for women's health. And you do this very publicly through mams.ie and other platforms. And I know you've been on radio and other podcasts as well.
Yeah.
But there's a dark side, I suppose, to social media where it can be quite cruel.
Oh, yeah.
And I know that you've been subject to trolling and you've been subject to a lot of negativity online.
Yeah.
How has that impacted you, given that what you're trying to do is promote awareness and, I suppose, help others to then be kind of subject to this abuse effectively?
I think it probably used to upset me more when social media was a little bit smaller. It felt quite targeted. Even now, if I'm talking about miscarriage or hysteroscopy or abortion or women's right to access health care. My second miscarriage was the baby had died and they wouldn't intervene. For 4 weeks, I continued to be pregnant and they wouldn't. I was like, give me a pill. No. Do something. No. And my belly continued to grow and they wouldn't intervene. And I've spoken about that quite a lot because it was a very different experience to the first one. But again, I needed healthcare and I didn't get it. And when I speak about that, people get really annoyed. People would say, oh, you're just a baby killer because you wanted to end your pregnancy. But actually, my baby had died and I was forced to continue to have my baby inside me for 4 more weeks. And the doctor actually said to me, just carry on as normal. I'm running a parenting website, running coffee mornings for pregnant women, literally interacting with mothers and pregnant women all day. That's what I do. And the doctor said, just carry on as normal and it'll happen when it happens. And it didn't happen. And I ended up needing a D&C in the end. But I get quite a lot of, hate for that, because when we repealed the 8th Amendment, I firmly believe, I never wanted to have a miscarriage. I want to be really clear. And I hope I'm never in a situation where somebody I love needs to access an abortion. But if they need to have access to those services, I really think that they need to be there. And I think it's not anybody else's business. I don't think it's anybody's business that I wanted to have abortion pills to end a pregnancy where the baby had died. And I don't think it's acceptable that people think I'm a baby killer, or I've been called, I cannot say the names I have been called. Somebody made up a name last week that was so horrendous. I thought it's kind of clever, but I can't even say it because it could catch on. So you have to take a certain level of that. But also, I've got 3 daughters, coming up in this world, and I want them to have better healthcare and better access than I did. And certainly with me as their mother, they'll have somebody fighting for them and giving them as much information as possible. And it's really difficult, especially when women come on and say, I had a woman come on our page the other day and quote scripture at me because I was saying, if somebody has a fatal abnormality, this is not a situation where they need to have an extra 3 days to think about what they want to do. I was very much in support of waiving the 3-day rule, which I never felt should have been introduced in the first place. It's like, are you sure? Now go away for 3 days and come back and think about it. No, A woman knows her own mind and knows what she needs. Somebody could be in an abusive relationship. They might not have the financial means to have a baby. They might not have a support network. They might have been abused. You don't know people's circumstances. And it's, you know what? Unless you're going to help them, it's none of your business. It's really none of your business. My body shouldn't impact other people. Like what? If I'm pregnant or if I need to access abortion services, how does that affect some fella, up in Dundalk who's calling me a baby killer? It's none of his business. Men are never... Can you think of any situation where men's bodies are judged and discussed and controlled and where men have access to healthcare? Like, can you think of any situation? You can go and buy Viagra over the counter with no prescription. But if you are in perimenopause, you have to jump through hoop to find a doctor to actually give you the prescription to get the HRT. And then you know what happens? HRT runs out. And then you know what happens? They're going to give it free to everybody and then it runs out again. And you know what never runs out? Viagra. So I know it's a bit reductive to use that example, but it just, men have a need, and I've no problem with men have access on Viagra. Of course I don't. But I think that the fact that a man can walk into a pharmacy and go, listen, bit of Viagra there, happy days, off you go. Where a woman could go in crying, having hot flushes, crazy periods, brain fog, I've done it, gone out with opposite shoes on. You don't know if you're coming or going. And to access the healthcare and support that you need, it's not there for you. And then when you speak out about it, you face a whole other level of, judgment. And what really disappointed me, and I cannot wait until Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael TDs come and knock on my door for their next election, because, and particularly Jim O'Callaghan, who said, we will eliminate that 3-day wait, who pledged, we will eliminate this 3-day wait. And what did they do? They voted against it. The fact that vote in the Dáil came down to 70 no's to 86 yeses that actually frightens me, because every time I think we're getting better, we're talking about miscarriage, hysteroscopy, perimenopause, menopause, we're talking about all of these things. This is good. We weren't really talking about them as much maybe 10 years ago. And then our government who say, we're going to do right by the women of Ireland and give them the access and what they need. And they didn't. They voted 70 of those people in there who represent me, us, women, voted no to women knowing their own minds. So how dare they say, you need to access abortion services? No, I think you should go away and think about it for 3 days. And the other problem with that is there is a serious shortage of doctor's appointments. So you could go to the doctor today and they say, now go away and think about it for 3 days. You might not get an appointment in 3 days. You might not get an appointment for 2 weeks. And then you may have gone too far and then you're having to leave the country. Again, it's avoidable. It's not necessary. And how does what goes on inside my body affect Jim O'Callaghan? Does he not have daughters, nieces, women in his life? I can't understand why somebody would stand up and say, I'm going to make sure this passes and this is done away with, abolished, and then decides, actually, no, I'm going to be conservative and I'm going to mollify all the insecure white men and all these men who need to try and repress and control women. And it's despicable to me, absolutely despicable. And I think some of the Holly Cairns and Mary Lou and I think some of the politicians, obviously the female politicians, have been brilliant in the way that they've highlighted this and fought for this. But the Social Democrats have been very good. I'm so disappointed that Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, and I know Micheál and Simon Harris come out and said, they personally were going to vote to abolish that 3-day rule, but their TDs didn't. So what does that tell you? We're not getting the best representation. And honestly, when I shared about that having passed in the Dáil, I had to turn off the comments. I had to turn off the notifications. I had to delete people. I had to block people. I had to then block profiles who were creating more pages to come back on and call me the baby killer and all this kind of stuff, because it's not about being a baby. It's absolutely not. I'm so maternal. I absolutely love being a mother. I love my kids. I love my nieces and nephews, or as I call them, nibblings. And that really annoys people, but I love that word. I think it's so cute. But really, like Jim O'Callaghan, it's none of your business what goes on in my body. And if you're going to make a pledge, follow it through. And if you're not, resign, because that's not what we signed up for. And you shouldn't be in that job anymore, in my opinion, as a lot of them shouldn't. Again, tell you what you want to hear, just don't deliver. They just don't deliver. So yeah, roll on when we get a female Taoiseach.
Siobhán, you mentioned to us there that you have 4 children. Can you tell us about a little bit about motherhood and how that changed your own personal sort of sense of identity?
Yeah, I think you can get quite lost in becoming a mother. You know what I don't like? If I'm out with particularly when they were quite small, and say you're in a cafe and you order whatever, you juice for the baby or the child, and you're having a cappuccino or whatever, and they go, "Mum, your coffee's ready." And I go, no, it's Siobhán. It's not just mum. That's not the only label that I wear. Yes, I'm a mother, but I'm also a person, a sister, a daughter. You know, I have a lot of different hats that I wear. And I think it does obviously take over your life to a certain degree. It really, being a parent does. It takes up a huge amount of your time, but it's important to, I think, carve a little bit of time for yourself and retain some of your identity, and even like little hobbies and interests. Like I like to do crossword puzzles and silly little things like that. But like I'll go off maybe for an hour with a magazine. And my husband's like, "How can you read trashy, glossy?" I say, "Do you know why I can read those magazines? Because I don't have to think about it. I don't have to do anything." So that's like my nasty little habit that I have. You know, I go off with a glossy magazine and I have a cappuccino and I have sometimes maybe a piece of cake, and I sit there and I do a crossword puzzle. And it's just about decompressing, because I think once you're a mother, you'll always be a mother. It can take over your personality, and it's hard not to let it take over your personality. And I love being a mother, and I think some of my happiest moments would be when, especially when I was breastfeeding them and they'd fall asleep and I'd have the little cushion and there'd be a little dribble of milk on the side of their mouth, and that's pure contentment when they're so happy and you're so happy. But I have teenagers now, and that's a whole other ball game. They can be quite challenging. So you need to make time for yourself. And also, if you're in a relationship, you need to make time for that as well. Because my husband and me, I would say we have a good marriage. We do. Some days I'd say we have a great marriage. But some days we can get sucked into parenting, and we can kind of end up rubbing up against each other the wrong way, you know. And you have to recognize, hang on a minute, I'll just take a step back. And I'll say to him, "Here, look, let's go to the cinema," or he'll say, "Let's go for a walk." And you need to take yourself out of that situation. And even being out of the house for an hour or two, I think that's a really good thing to do, because you need to see, oh, that's my husband, and he's Dave and I'm Siobhán, and we know how to have fun together and go for a walk and hold hands and have a smooch or embarrass, whatever it is. But that's important, because if you stay the whole time parenting the whole time, it can kind of shrink you down a little bit. I think it's a hard balance to find.
Siobhán, you've probably answered this last question to an extent already, but what we do ask everybody that comes on the podcast is, how do you mind yourself?
Yeah, I like to go for my little coffee and go for a walk on the beach and have my little crosswords. I'll have a bath, and they're getting a bit bigger now, so I don't have to lock the door, because it used to be where I'd try and have a bath and somebody would just run in and jump in with me. And I say to the kids now, if I'm struggling, I say, I'm actually struggling. And I think it's healthy to say that to them. So I've been going through, I'm in perimenopause. It's a really confusing time. You get aches and pains and joints in your joints. You're not sleeping. And why does my knee hurt? Why does this hurt? Why does that hurt? Why can I not remember things? I went to the shop today for butter and I come home with no butter. Silly things like that. And I think it's important to say to them, I'm actually not just, "Kids, give me a hand." I will say to my children, I'm actually struggling. I'm actually having a really hard day, or I'm having a really hard week and I need some help. I will actually say that to them. And I think if I want them to come to me and say, Mom, I'm actually struggling, they need to know that I also struggle. And I think everybody struggles. And I think we all hide it to a certain element, certain degree. And sometimes you hop on your happy face and you kind of pretend everything's okay. And even when I was coming in today, I was getting dressed, and my daughter, she's so sweet, she was helping me. And because I had a little knock yesterday and I got a little bit of an injury, and she was like, what can I do to help? And I said, look, you can straighten the back of my hair for me. And she was like, wear the red dress. And I said, yes, and I'm going to wear red lipstick because I don't feel great, but that will really give me a little bit of armor. So things like that, I think recognizing I'm actually having a really bad day. And I think crying is healthy. I cry I cried at Madonna in the halftime show at that football World Cup thingy when she came out, and I'm like, look at her. She's just, she doesn't care what anybody thinks. I think Madonna is the person I want to be when I grow up. Just to actually, I'm sure she does care to a certain degree, but to just think, what the hell? I'm just going to go and do it. So yeah, I had a cry. I think crying is healthy. And I'm not afraid to let the kids see me have a little cry every now and then. And every time I'll say to them, look, I think I need to go and have a massage. And I will go and have a massage, or go and get my hair cut. Taking time for yourself. And it's kind of selfish, but actually you have to be a little bit selfish, because you have to love yourself, because you can't really love other people if you're not looking after yourself. It's that old thing about on the airplane, if the oxygen thing comes down, your instinct as a mother would be to definitely put your child on first, but you do have to look after yourself. And I don't speak negatively about myself in front of my children. I try not to. I don't go, oh God, I feel so fat, or I look so awful, or I try not to speak in those terms, because what's that going to teach them? I try to speak mostly, I have days where I'm frazzled and I'm not my best self, but that's part and parcel. So I try to give them the realest version of me, and if I'm struggling, I'll tell them. But then also I'll just come in some days and just tell them how great I think they are and how much I love them. And I'm constantly trying to get them to come in and watch movies, and we play board games sometimes, which sometimes ends well and sometimes doesn't. But I always keep trying. And I think that's the other thing as well with teenagers. It's hard, because 9 out of 10 times you say, come on down, we'll watch A Modern Family or Brooklyn Nine-Nine or something like that. Come on down. And 9 out of 10 they'll say no, but the one time then they will. And I want them to come down. So it's trying to find a balance. And also, my son said to me the other day, Mom, I think you know everything. I said, no, I really, really, really don't. And anyone who thinks they do has a big problem, because nobody knows everything. And I think I still want to learn, and I read a lot, and I try to learn, and I like to experience things, and I do things that I'm a little bit afraid of. I did a zip wire there and crazy things like that. Not that crazy. I did the Cuchulainn in Emerald Park because I was terrified to do it, and they were laughing at me, and I was like, I'll do it. So we did it, and we have a little key ring. I'm holding on to my younger daughter. She's laughing and I'm crying, but challenging myself and letting them see me when I fail and when I succeed, and knowing that I actually said to Mitchell the other day, I said, you learn more from the failures, I think. And I had a couple of jobs that I didn't like when I was younger, and one of the first jobs I ever had, I was quite young, but that was the job where I learned the most, even though it was an awful job and it was terrible, but you learn so much. So even the things that are hard, I think you can learn from them.
Siobhán, thank you so much for coming on to the Mind Yourself podcast. If people want to reach out to you, it's mams.ie.
Yeah, mams.ie, that's the website, and mams.ie on Instagram. And then it's mams.ireland on Facebook, because for some reason they won't let me change that, and I don't know why. So that's us, yeah.
Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
That is it for today's episode of Mind Yourself. If something in this conversation has resonated with you, share it with someone who might need to hear it, because these are the conversations that matter. Don't forget to follow or subscribe so you never miss an episode. And if you're enjoying the podcast, a quick rating or review really helps us to reach more people. So until next time, mind yourself.